And do make sure that you are following us, of course, over on YouTube and Spotify. Like, subscribe to our channel, comment on all of our videos, and tell us everything that we've got wrong. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Now, first up, we are talking about the new film starring and produced by Rami Malek. It's called The Amateur. This film also stars Rachel Brosnahan and Laurence Fishburne. And it's directed by James Hawes, who you might know from his work on Doctor Who. Jake and I are, of course, huge fans, so expect many a tangent. Now, James, I went into this thinking, okay, this is probably not going to be very good, but it might be a bit of fun. And do you know what? I actually thought that was exactly what it did. This was precisely what it advertised itself as. A very familiar story about a man who loses his wife and goes on a bit of a rampage. But I thought it was pretty well executed and did what it said in the tin in a pretty satisfying way. Were you on the same page? Is this something that you're going to sink into on a Sunday evening when you've got nothing better to do, or are you avoiding this like the plague?
Well, it sort of sits in the middle. It's a bit like white bread. It has a relative comfort factor, but that comfort isn't very nutritious. Actually, no, that's a bit harsh against white bread, to be honest. This is way worse than white bread. I love white bread. You know what it feels like, this film? Because I find it hard to talk about because I think it has a very middling sort of sense about it. And I always find that's very difficult to talk about films that I don't have anything wildly positive or wildly negative to say. I just say, oh, fine. And well, it's directed, fine. It's edited in a typical manner. Laurence Fishburne's good, I guess. All 10 minutes he shows up on screen. I think it's just very, very stock, but it's slightly elevated amongst that sort of typical action schlock that you see on Amazon Prime or shifted onto Netflix or Tubi or one of the other ones. It's got a bit more sense about it, but you know what it feels like? It feels like when all those old movie stars who used to be in great dramas and have won their Oscars are getting a bit too old and they're like, what am I going to do now? Oh yes, I'll pivot to become an action star. Yet this is Rami Malek, who's relatively young, just won the Oscar a few years ago, and he wants to be an action star. He produced this. When I saw that in the opening credits, I was like, oh, it actually shifted my opinion of the whole movie, that I actually felt more negative about it because I was like, what is Rami Malek doing? He's so miscast in this part. And I'm like, he's supposed to be that type of person, too slender, like not very muscular, very quiet, very introverted. But also Rami Malek has, in this film especially, has the emotional range of a brick. It's no spoiler, really. I'm sure they give this away in the trailer. And this trope of films do it all the time. But his wife gets killed and he goes to seek revenge. But he's just, when he hears the news, he doesn't really react. I never believe the conceit. He doesn't react what I'd consider quite emotional. He reacts very subdued in a way that some people might just see as subtlety. I just see as it doesn't exist. It isn't there. I don't really believe that he ever loved his wife. They only have a few scenes together that just show them being a bit quirky together. You don't really get a sense of loss, a sense of that this character, that Rachel Brosnahan, who is going to be the new Lois Lane, and I'm very excited for that, but she has nothing to do in the film. She gets fridged, and then she's, just nothing else. We're just told that they're in love and they have a little scene in the beginning, and then she gets killed and he works for a secret agency. It's just, and it's very grey. Everything's very grey. And if I go back to my favorite film of all time, a Minecraft movie, that film at least had colour. I was just really like, God, I miss James Bond. Where is the sense of fun? Revenge thrillers, even though they rely on this big emotional crux, this big emotional disaster happening for our main character, are usually quite entertaining and usually quite fun to watch because you want to see him destroy the bad guys. And yes, there's some interesting moments in this, the way he goes about his kills, because he doesn't want to get his hands dirty, so that it's always slightly removed from the actual act of killing. But he does become almost an assassin Well, he does become an assassin. What am I saying? It doesn't have the emotional weight for me to believe it, and it doesn't have the charm to get away with some of its more goofy elements. So I wasn't a huge fan, but I think you are right, Reuben, that you could just stick it on. It's one of those things you could enjoy a slice of Warburton's white bread toast and just watch it and forget it a day later, because it just doesn't have much to resonate. I don't know why Rami Malek really wanted to produce this film, if not as a almost vanity piece to try and make him a cool action-packed thriller who's more intelligent than anyone else in the room. It feels like he's trying to relive his Mr. Robot days. And so, I don't really rate it, really. I think it was a bit bland.
Yeah, I mean, I personally thought this was decently paced. I liked the performances. I think Rami Malek has more range than maybe you're giving him credit for. And what I thought was interesting about this film, having gone into it knowing, okay, it's an adaptation of a kind of an 80s book, very much playing in the same wheelhouse as Jason Bourne or John Wick, or as you say, kind of Liam Neeson in the Taken movies or several other films that he's also done. We're very familiar with the formula of these things. And I actually love some of those films. What sometimes troubles me, and a good example of this is Nobody, the, I think, 2020 film, is often I think that they can feed a very toxic view of masculinity and the role of men in society. Because particularly if you look at Nobody, that's a film about a man who is aging, a man who perhaps feels like he's lost his value in society, even though, he has a lovely family, a really good relationship with his wife. And what happens in that film is that basically the way that he gets his life back on track and becomes, in the film's view, kind of like a valuable member of society, is he goes on a big revenge mission, which involves him doing a lot of damage to kind of awful, young, cocky men that he beats along the way. For me, what was interesting about this film is actually it didn't go down that path. Rami Malek is not a particularly masculine guy in this film. The character that he's playing is in many ways not your average US action hero. It's not a film that reinforces the sort of macho myth of US masculinity and kind of testosterone-fueled punch-ups. Instead, what we get is this kind of very, in many ways, quite effeminate, very sensitive individual who actually, over the course of the film, doesn't become a kind of big adrenaline junkie US Marine type whose purpose he realizes is to be a big, strong man who punches people and protects his wife because that's what men do. Like, that's not the narrative that this goes into. And for that, I was grateful. I thought that made it a much more interesting story. And it gave it a bit more nuance. And it also opens up the opportunity for them to say, okay, well, if he's not going to have the physical advantage, what does he have? And so going down the route of inventive kills, I thought was really smart. We get some sort of Saw Trap style situations in this. I'm going to talk about the one that's in the trailer because I just think it's gosh darn fun. There's a man, it's so inefficient, by the way, as an execution method. There's a man swimming in a pool, but it's one of those big glass pools between two buildings. And he rigs a special piece of kit that we never actually get explained, which will depressurize the air between the glass so that it collapses. And that's such a fun way of doing a murder. That's so inventive. That could be in Midsummer Murders if they had the budget. It's a ludicrously overcomplicated manner of dispatching your foes, but a deeply fun one. And that was, to me, the film in a nutshell. It's a bit overcomplicated. It's trying to do something a little bit different, but fundamentally, it's all a bit silly. And you know what? That's great. That's exactly what I wanted it to be. And I think I've mentioned on this pod before, there's a genre of films that we refer to in my family as big explosions and the good guys win. This is big explosions and the good guys win, and I'm down for that. So for me, The Amateur was a really pleasant surprise. I thought it was going to be, this tired formula, trotted out again with no new ideas and no bells and whistles. And actually, I thought it was really solidly done. There are problems with it. As you say, Laurence Fishburne barely shows up. Rachel Brosnahan, I guess maybe she was really busy filming Superman because she's just not really in this film, and she gets stuck with a very dated trope of this, oh no, the dead wife. It could be a Christopher Nolan film in the way that she's just immediately killed in order to give this man some kind of motivation.
But with Christopher Nolan, I see that many times that the connection between those people who are killed, and yes, it's a trope that should be retired or at least developed and sort of made a bit more interesting. But I always believe that the people who have to suffer the loss of their loved one actually feel it, like I genuinely believe that those characters, maybe it's just better direction with still a similar level of nuance that is represented, or lack of nuance that is represented in the amateur, but maybe they just get directed a nicer way because it doesn't feel like it. I don't feel like they had any connection. There's not much chemistry. But even if there was, there's not much time to show it. And I think it does really fail the film. It's not bad film. It's very amateurish in its writing.
I thought that the Rachel Brosnahan character was not so much fridged as shoved into the deep freeze as soon as the film started. And, I think that is a problem. I think that the film wants you to believe in their romance and be more emotionally invested than I think I was. However, when you have this kind of big globe-trotting story being told in a very competent manner with some decent action, but I thought it was fairly engrossing. There were definitely moments where I was quite tense. There was one moment where I did a big gasp, which is quite impressive. So honestly, yeah, for me, I did have fun. I think if I look at this within the oeuvre of the director, James Hawes, it's not touching any of his Doctor Who work because he's directed some of the greatest episodes of New Who and Doctor Who as a whole ever put to screen.
Well, that's a thing I was going to bring up once you started the tangent. I'm glad that you dipped your toe into the Doctor Who field first, is that I will go back to my main problem with the film. This James Hawes directed School Reunion, which is such an interesting way of dealing with abandonment and loss between characters in a different way, a much more nuanced way, when Sarah Jane Smith has to evaluate her relationship with the Doctor, someone who, to all intents and purposes, abandoned her in the mid-70s in Aberdeen, abandoned her and never went back until, 30, 40 years later. And that's dealt with really nicely. I think the director has the potential. It feels like this script has just been blacked out with any sense of like, oh, that was interesting. No, we need to meet all these beats, because you said that the traps were like Saw, whereas I do not feel that they were anywhere near as interesting. If you're not going to explain how you're going to defy the laws of architecture and physics, then at least make it a little more interesting in the other ones that he did. I think, yes, the swimming pool murder is interesting, but the others are a little unbelievable at times.
Do you know what, though? He kills so many people with that swimming pool. I really enjoy it. They've added in like an ADR, watch out, to cover up for the fact that there is a street full of people below who are definitely cut into lots of tiny pieces.
His moral journey is very warped, I believe. Because it's the typical, oh, I'm a bad person, or I want to be a bad person, but you're not a bad person on the inside. And then, yes, at the end, I am a good guy. The good guys win and there are explosions, as Reuben said. And I'm like, well, actually, this guy has committed some really massive atrocities, including treason. So I don't think he's a good guy. I think he should be in prison.
No, okay. But I actually think one of the more interesting things about this film is the way in which it engages with CIA corruption. We know, because we've seen it from a long, history of American operations in secret and black ops, that there is shadowy stuff going on underneath. And I like the way that, okay, in this, it's not really that the USA are the big, good, moral center of the universe. Often in these films, as I say, there is this kind of, I think, very off-putting, often quite jingoistic sense of male American sovereignty and power and importance as the moral center of the universe. And I like that this was actually saying, okay, well, I don't think that's the case. That's not the avenue we're going to go down. So I don't know. I feel like you're not giving it as much credit as it's due. I don't think that this is just the same old thing hashed out again. And honestly, I had fun. I was entertained. And when that big swimming pool fell, I thought, many people dead. That's going to be a difficult one to explain in the paperwork. But yeah, it's fun. I think you should go and see it, dear viewers. It's decent fun. And especially if you're looking for, 2 hours to just go and switch your brain off. Like, it is switch your brain off cinema, but there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. And there's definitely a place for these kind of fun, brain-free thrillers that you'll have a broadly nice time, and you'll come out the other end and think, that was fun.